How are you?
Hi, Peter. Fine.
Good stuff. So today we're going to do one episode just on one question from the audience. So I would like everybody in the audience to get their comments in the chat because we're really interested in ideas to do future programs. Now, today's question comes from Balancing the Economy 7200. And he says, "Hi, Fred. I've been a huge fan of yours since the 80s. And I have a question regarding one issue in one of your books, The Power in the Land. In the latter part of the book, you suggest that through one of your graphs that the site value, the actual land value, will be reduced by 70% when we start taking that community generated wealth. Could you explain the rationale to this and suggest if this still works today?"
Well, this will be an alarming question for a lot of our viewers today, Peter, because people are banking on the capital gains on their home for support, like in old age, to pay for their care and that kind of thing. And for someone to be suggesting that the whole of it or most of it would be removed is distressing, and uh, it it can't be rationally understood unless we locate the proposition in its full context. We need to understand that full economic context before I give a direct confirmation that yes, I'm proposing that essentially all of the capital gains that accrues to the location value of every property should be pooled into the public purse. That sounds revolutionary, outrageous, whatever you like to call it, but please suspend judgment until I've explained two contexts within which this issue ought to be considered. The first is about our relationship with our government. As homeowners, what do we expect from the government? And how do we go about that democratic, that political approach to governance, which most of us are dissatisfied with today? The problem starts with this. As homeowners, we want more public services, but we want to pay less in taxation. We do not conjoin those two issues to arrive at a sensible solution. If you want something, you need to pay for it. But under our current system, the discussion separates my opportunity to accumulate capital gains from I want more nurses to be looking after patients in hospitals. I want more teachers. I want more improvements to the road infrastructure and so on, without talking about, well, where is the money coming from? And that is the moral dilemma that is one of the big flaws in our current system. And the equivalent of that personal problem is with the way governments operate. Political parties seek power. They make fantastic range of promises. They might even say they've costed some of the promises, but at no point do they then say to the electorate before the election, if you want these services, will you pay for them? There is no discussion about equating what the government proposes to create or deliver and the actual cost, which is why every time we have an election, a government comes into being, and oh, good gracious, we didn't realize there's a big hole in the budget left to us by the previous government. Well, of course, there is a big hole because governments do not link the services they provide with the cost of providing them, so that there can be a democratic conversation about what do we want and are we willing to pay for it. So that's the moral dilemma that exposes the flaw in the capital gains that we're delighted to be receiving on our homes. We don't talk about where that value comes from, and our anger at governments not delivering all the services we want. Of course, there's a disconnect between the two. And if we want a democratic system of government that actually works, we have to talk about whether we are willing to pay for the things we say we want. I'll suspend that context and then go on to the second one, which is the claims by the people on the political right that to have an efficient economic system, we have to cut taxes. That's one of their profound beliefs. You cut taxes, you get greater efficiency. And most of us seem to subscribe to that, because who wants to pay taxes if we can avoid paying for them? There is a problem with cutting taxes, and that is, if you cut taxes, you can't have all the services you want. Now, what it would be good for our viewers to concentrate on is the difference between, say, the American economy, which is deemed to be really efficient because they have the lowest tax take among the Western developed countries. The tax take as a proportion of GDP is about 17% in America. It is way higher in Norway. So from that, we're supposed to believe that if in Norway they're paying half of the national income or more into the public purse, they must be a very inefficient economy. Whereas in America, they pay a lot less, so they must be very efficient. Here's the problem. The people in Norway are among the happiest in the world. The people in America are far below that level. They are not among the least happiest, but they are very unhappy. So in America, they don't pay as much taxes into the public purse, but they're also very unhappy. Whereas in Norway, they pay a heck of a lot more into the public purse, and they're very happy. And nobody can say that the difference between the UK, USA, and Norway is that the Norwegians are less efficient in terms of their economies. Their living standard is equal to that of the average household in America. And yet they are among the happiest nations in the world, even though they're paying a huge amount more than the Americans into the tax, into the public finances. So that brings us back to the question that you posed. If we are to achieve the optimum efficiency so that we have all the public services we want, and we are among the happiest nations in the world, yes, we have to pay it out of rent. And that means there is less left to capitalize into property assets. If we were consistent, then we would be paying all of the rent into the public purse, so that there is none left to privatize, so that property values would be the depreciated value of the improvements in and on the land, the dwelling and any other improvements made on the land. That means you would cut out the capital gains that you don't actually earn. Well, first of all, what about my old age? How am I going to support myself if I don't have the capital gains? Well, because allowing for a correct time lag to introduce this system, you would be investing in insurance policies and the assets that create value so that by the time you retire, you would have as much at your disposal to cash in to look after yourself or to hand to your children as you do now. Except that now what you're doing is at the expense of the future generations. And it's only for the privileged number of people who have the high value homes who actually can cash in their capital gains and then enjoy a full retirement life. So in the correct economic model, the one that is morally based, where when we say we want public services, we agree to pay for them, we would be depleting, reducing the value of the capital gains on our homes. And this is a moral as more than an economic one, actually. We say we want the capital gains to pass on to our children, but under the present system, we are barring so many children from being able to acquire the homes they need to start the families that we all need. So we have a social system that lacks the morality for a holistic, a socially vital social system. These are the moral issues that there are so many aspects of them, and we have to come to terms with them before a government can start introducing the new financing system that is consistent both with morality and economic efficiency. So yes, in my first book, The Power in the Land, I did argue that ultimately the capital gains on land ought to be devoted to funding the public services we want. But we would all actually be richer morally and materially under that system if we could overcome the barriers to making the change, which those who benefit from the current system won't allow us to discuss. There is the problem. We can't get into that conversation because there are too many people who love to free ride on the backs of the working population. And so they keep in place this disastrous system so that they can enjoy happy lives in old age, whereas most people find it either a struggle or an impossible challenge.
Mm.
I don't know if that answers the question in a way that the questioner would find satisfactory, but having studied for the last 50 years this proposition, it's either we accept that new approach or we continue to ridicule our governments for making empty promises which they fail to keep. But we, in that case, have to accept our responsibility because we are actually enabling this essentially rotten system by, on the one hand, wanting to keep our capital gains, but at the same time wanting governments to somehow magic out of the air all of the public services that we say we want. That's the dilemma.
So, to encapsulate what you've been saying, the capital gains that we receive are essentially stolen income. It's a morally bad thing, and yet we hide the huge devastation we do to our children and the economy by taking those capital gains. And in many people want to say, oh, it's the billionaires. And well, billionaires often get a lot more in capital gains than poor people. But we have to recognize the original sin of our system as that capital gains we receive for doing nothing.
Yeah. There, I always remember a saying by a colleague of mine who's now long gone. He was a judge in the English High Court, Sir Kenneth Jupp, who said, look, we can't have half justice. We can't say that it's just to penalize the billionaires and then think that we're going to have a justice-based system. If we're going for justice, then we have to be consistent. Insofar as any of us is collecting capital gains on the locations of our homes, we are contributing to the pathologies that damage people's welfare, the vitality of our communities, and the natural environment. We're all contributing to it to a more or less degree. And if we're to go for a moral society, a justice-based society, we have to be consistent. We are all in it and have to apply the same rule to everybody. And the rule is a simple one. If you want it, you pay for it. Like when we go into the supermarket, we don't expect to see the rich people pay more for the same basket of goods than the poor people. If the poor people want it, they pay as much as the rich people for the products that they want to buy. But under the justice-based system, everybody achieves a level of prosperity where we abolish finally poverty. And so that then elevates our society to the standard of the Scandinavian level, happiness, real happiness. And if we manage to achieve that in America or the United Kingdom or France, we would wonder why it took so long to get around to doing it.
So, Fred, a lot of people on the left would then accuse you of stealing money, and the poor will have nothing, and old people will starve to death if they have to pay for things. How do we get around that problem?
Well, but that's the plight of the poor people today, not about the situation that would apply in the future. You see, people today are involuntarily poor. In the new system, there would be no poor people unless they wanted to be poor. Everybody would be getting a fair deal in terms of their earned incomes and from their investments. So the things like the benefits that are currently paid out to low income people would not be needed because people they just wouldn't need the benefits to be paid to them because the power relationships would be fundamentally altered. At the moment, Labour is at a severe disadvantage in relation to the distribution of income compared to those who own the assets that generate the rents. Well, if we remove that power from those who own the rent generating assets, that means we've transferred power back to the working population, and their share of the national income would go up so that there would be no level of poverty other than for those people who choose to become hermits and to live in the forests and opt out of society. That would be their privilege. But there would be no poor segregations of low-income peoples into the disgraceful kind of society that we have at the present time, where we segregate low-income people into ghettos. Those ghettos would go.
I can hear some people saying, you know, and when they hear your advice, they're terrified. But what about the disabled people? What about, the orphans? They can't work. They can't look after themselves. How are they going to fend in this free market utopia you talk about, Fred?
Yeah. Well, yes, I do. And that free market utopia includes the human empathies that are ingrained into all of us, which means that people who are disadvantaged in the way that you've described would get a better deal than they are now. At the moment, the subsidies for disadvantaged people are squeezed out of future generations through the debt system, which we need to abolish and which we can easily abolish, so that those who need humane treatment are treated humanely by a system where all of us now control our own fate. And we would want people who are disadvantaged to be fully supported as participating members of our society. Remember, the segregation that goes on is in the kind of society that we have now. Whereas what we are now talking about is an inclusive society where everybody participates, and insofar as someone can't do so, he or she is entitled to be supported fully.
So we're going to live in a world, if we take this community created wealth as our national income, but we're going to live in a world where living costs are going to be substantially smaller. Our wages are going to be substantially higher for the work we do. And therefore, it's an easy decision to look after people who are disadvantaged for society.
Yes, what we're talking about is a balanced system that takes into account all the considerations. We're not looking at a system where there is excess. Consider the grotesque waste of resources at the present time through the mad scramble for material wealth. Well, people wouldn't be interested in that kind of behavior in a system that is grounded in morality and where their pursuit is personal happiness. Material security, yes, but now the priorities shift to cultural norms, people able to enrich their personalities through engaging in the kind of cultural activities for which they would have more time, because they're not scrambling around to make ends meet if the interest rates go up or whatever. The house prices keep going up. We're talking about a humane society, and which is a responsible society, as opposed to our society, which is an irresponsible society that cannot deliver on what we would ideally like from our government.
So, Fred, the question of morality is how do you communicate that as the thought leader on this subject? So, this is the theme of your next book, is it not?
Well, yes, it is one of the big themes. We have to take a long perspective on all the problems that we have. We have to look at the beginnings of what it is that defines our human nature. How did human beings develop in the first place, and what went wrong? See, if during the evolutionary phases people were as mad, as cutthroat, as selfish as we are now, human beings would never have evolved. Something went wrong. When did it go wrong? How did it go wrong? Yes, that's the subject of my next book.
Well, we all wait with bated breath, Fred. It'll be good to
Yeah.
see it. Is there anything else we should cover tonight?
I'd like to stress, if I may, for those who are still with us watching to the end of the interview, to please suspend judgment if you're frightened by the prospect of losing the capital gains on your homes, and dig deeper. Either read some of the books on the subject or discuss it with your neighbors. Try and figure out, why is it that all the key moral and spiritual people of the last 5,000 years, using the language that they had at their command, came to the same conclusion as what we have today in our science-based system? Because this is not new. This is the struggle to find the basis of the moral society, and to achieve it. They failed consistently in the past, and we have to ask ourselves, can we really afford to postpone achieving justice today? Aren't the risks just far too great for the sake of saving humanity? Shouldn't we be at least engaging in a conversation about these issues?
Absolutely, Fred. We all have to look deep in ourselves and understand what is our moral right in society, and be a very honest conversation about the damage we do by taking that capital gain. It is the fundamental flaw in society, and it is getting to the point where people can't cope anymore. We can see that in the recent little by-election in Manchester. People are at their wits' end, pensioners, workers. It's getting to the point in the economic cycle where rent is just, you can't work to keep a healthy lifestyle anymore.
And that's why there is the risk that unless we somehow have this conversation on a big enough scale, the likes of an Adolf Hitler will once again seize the opportunity, and we just can't let that happen.
There is one dangerous prospect, that we get a well-meaning green government which will start taxing more and cannot deliver on its promises, because it's taxing people's wages, not economic rents. But the more frightening position is that Farage and somebody like him will capture government, they'll introduce stronger measures, and then suddenly the jackboots and the cattle trucks will be moving again, and we'll descend into a nightmare.
That's the risk that we're at the present time. And so people do need to pause and think, to work out that maybe they ought to give support to this particular solution, because frankly, there isn't another one available.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you, Peter.
Wise words for us all to hear.